colleague, the Minister for Sport and Youth Affairs, Honorable Shamfa Cudjoe, and I'll let Minister Cudjoe start.
I am here to give you some updates as it relates to the Special Olympic athlete who would have been a part of the team of athletes and coaches that went out to Abu Dhabi to represent Trinidad and Tobago in the Special Olympics. As you may know, we would have had 44 people who traveled out to Abu Dhabi to represent Trinidad and Tobago in the Games. On last week, Friday, when the team returned home, we had one athlete short and one coach short, and that is because Ms. Shanice Batiste had fallen ill while in Abu Dhabi. I would have recognized that much of the information that was circulated in the public domain has been far from reality. What has been circulated, a number of the items mentioned are not does not reflect the reality, so I'm here today to clear up those matters. On Thursday night of last week, I received a Facebook message from one Avalon Perry, who notified me that she's good friends with Miss Ava Batiste, a close friend. She's a representative of the family, actually. And she had concerns that during that day, they received a call that Miss Shanice Batiste would not be returning home with the team because she had fallen ill and had been hospitalized. She wanted more information, and I made a commitment to investigate the matter and ensure that the family is contacted. So within 6 minutes, when I got the message, I contacted the ministry officials who made contact with SOTT and got back to the family to state what the status of Miss Batiste had been. I learned that she would have gotten an asthma attack while out there in Abu Dhabi, and she was hospitalized, and she would not be returning with the team. On Friday last week, when, a matter of fact, the Miss Avalon Perry, who would have contacted me on the matter, she sent me a message to say that the family is now informed, and she thanked me for the assistance. On Friday, when the team returned, there was a welcome reception that was hosted by NLCB and Digicel Foundation, which is those two organizations are sponsors of the Special Olympics team. So I was invited to give remarks. I got there, I gave remarks, I asked for an update on what was taking place with Shanice, and I was told by Mr. Benjamin, who was sitting next to me, that she had suffered an asthma attack and was hospitalized. I then kept in contact with the SOTT. I was notified that on Saturday they contacted the family to give them updates, and on Monday, 2 representatives of the SOTT went to the house of Miss Shanice Batiste. Her name is Miss Ava Batiste, around 1 p.m. on Monday to visit her and to update her as to the developments as it relates to her daughter. On Tuesday morning, when I woke up, I recognized that I was tagged in a social media message stating that an athlete had been forgotten in Abu Dhabi, and I said this is far from the truth. So I reached out to the mother at 5:01. She answered. She said to me, Miss Cudjoe, I don't know the reason for this confusion because I have been contacted. My only challenge is that I have not been able to speak to my daughter directly. And on Tuesday at that time, I made a commitment to ensure that during the course of the day, I'll make the necessary arrangements so that she could at least hear her daughter's voice. I immediately contacted my staff at the ministry. They were on their way to the airport to head to Tobago because we launched a youth program in Tobago on that day. I asked them to please turn back, make contact with Miss Candela Beaumont Harper. She is the president of the SOTT. Mrs. Beaumont Harper had stated that she is an aged lady and she's unable to drive to Miss Ava, right? So she asked to be picked up. So we picked up Miss Beaumont Harper and then picked up Miss Avril Wright, who is the sister of Ava Wright. Early that morning on Tuesday, I would have spoken to Avril Wright also, and she would have stated how displeased that she was. So we picked her up and traveled to Ava Wright's house. I was in Tobago. I'm talking about my team here. My Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mr. Patrice Charles, who also is the Director of the Division of Sport, my personnel staff, and so on. And while there, they interacted with the family and contacted Miss Clevernique Cupid, who is the coach, who is a part of the SOTT team that remained in Abu Dhabi with Shanice. We had been updated that Shanice had been recuperating well. She's off oxygen therapy, and arrangements had to be made to get her back to Trinidad. However, the doctors in Abu Dhabi felt that it was unsafe for her to fly at high altitudes without the necessary respiration equipment. So arrangements had to be made to have the Abu Dhabi medics or the medical professionals fly with the team, and so the respiration equipment could be transferred through the airport. So arrangements were made with British Airways and the airport officials in Gatwick and Heathrow so that the transfer could be made safely and effectively. And plans were made for her to return on the 28th, which is today. So coming out of the visit, they talked, and Candela and the family had been in contact. I made sure and kept in contact with them. Up to yesterday, the family had been in contact with me and with the president of the SOTT. Up to this morning, we contacted Shanice through the coach, Miss Clevernique Cupid. All the expenses are being paid for by the Abu Dhabi officials because this is a Special Olympics. They have insurance and necessary arrangements just in case something goes wrong. And there's a new date for the flight because the transfer from Gatwick to Heathrow, the officials at both airports would have made arrangements so that the oxygen apparatus could be in place for the first. So we expect Shanice to fly home on the first. Now, one of the challenging things coming out of this development is that there had been so many different stories being generated and circulated in the public domain, and I think at the end of the day we all are just concerned for the safe and healthy return of this young lady. There's somebody from the family, a close member of the family, who had been asking the SOTT, calling on the SOTT for compensation. I've even learned about a meeting held in the community last night where the family had been asking for donations. And that is not needed because all these expenses are being covered by the Special Olympic officials in Abu Dhabi that have been in close collaboration and communication with the Washington, D.C. officials and the Trinidad and Tobago officials. So the two are well taken care of, and we expect them to fly home on the 1st of April. In addition, our cabinet would have made a decision today to include the Special Olympics in the incentive and reward framework. So these athletes would now be rewarded for each medal. For each gold medal, the athlete gets $12,000. For each silver medal, $6,000, and for each bronze medal, $3,000. This is a new development, not just for Trinidad and Tobago, but for the rest of the world, because so far we know of roughly three other countries that have now signed on to have now established giving these incentives for Special Olympics. And those are India, Pakistan, and Seychelles. So we have decided to join and to offer the necessary incentives to inspire and encourage these young people with these special abilities to participate in sport. It is a part of our total participation in sport policy, and we intend to continue to work closely with the Special Olympic Committee of Trinidad and Tobago to get more people of all abilities to participate in sport in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Minister Cudjoe. There are three issues that I'd like the opportunity to discuss with you all here this afternoon. Two are cabinet decisions, and one is a general position that unfortunately has arisen in the public domain and space. First of all, I'm pleased to announce that Cabinet today has approved and confirmed the acquisition and installation of an alarm system, an updated alarm system at the maximum security prison. This administration has been focusing a lot of time and effort on the prison systems and on the prison authorities and the prison services. And when I had gone upon coming into the office of Minister of National Security sometime last year, one of the things the Prison Officer Association raised with us as a government at that stage was updating the alarm system at maximum security prison. I'm pleased to announce that today the Cabinet has taken a decision to both approve and confirm. So we will be working very quickly to have these systems upgraded and installed. And it's the same service provider that has recently is in the process of completing the system at the Golden Grove prison. The next item, which again is to do with the prison service, and I'm particularly pleased about this. You would have heard me describing in the last couple of weeks that it is our belief as a government, a great part of the prison system that has been lacking, that had fallen in disarray, and there wasn't a public understanding of it anymore, was the rehabilitative side of prisoners, of inmates in the prison system, and preparing them from a psychological point of view for re-entrance into society, or even for dealing with what may have been the psychological effects of them committing some wrongdoing to end up in the prison system in the first place. I've been speaking about it. I've been saying that we're going to be pushing as an administration the whole rehabilitation of our inmates and reintegration, helping them and assisting them. I'm pleased to say today the Cabinet approved and confirmed that we can, at the prison system, hire an additional 10 prison psychologists and then the support staff for them. And Cabinet has also given us the permission today, approved and confirmed, to hire a senior prison pharmacist and a junior prison pharmacist to supplement what already exists. These small decisions are going to have a tremendous effect, I hope, in the prison system, in particular the hiring of these psychologists to assist not only our inmates who are in the system, but also our prison officers, the men and women who are there. They are very often subject to a lot. Anyone who has traversed the prison system will understand the difficulties and the psychological difficulties sometimes of operating in those environments. So I'm very pleased to announce, and I'm certain that the Prison Officers Association, as well as the inmates at the various prison institutions, will immediately recognize and be appreciative of the decision for us to not only supplement but add an additional 10 psychologists. I think there's only one psychologist right now in the prison system. So immediately we've increased that by tenfold, and also to increase the pharmacist support in the prison system by agreeing to the hiring of a senior prison pharmacist and a junior prison pharmacist. And then we'll be moving to make those positions permanent and pensionable. So those are the two announcements of the Cabinet decisions related to the prison services. The last issue I'd like to address with you all here this afternoon, before allowing some questions, is what we've seen, a conversation, or the attempt to build a conversation, a narrative in the public domain in the energy sector. When this administration came in, it is no secret, and we made it very, very public, that there were a lot of difficulties in our energy sector, and in particular, the gas sector in Trinidad and Tobago. The National Gas Company in Trinidad and Tobago basically purchases gas from upstream gas producers, the main ones of whom are BP, Shell, EOG, BHP, and Perenco does a little bit. The main players are BP, Shell, EOG, and BHP to a lesser extent. When we came in as an administration, there were serious curtailment issues taking place in our gas industry. There simply was not sufficient gas. The gas in Trinidad and Tobago goes to two main sectors: the LNG sector, which is Atlantic LNG, and then the downstream petrochemical sector, which is in Point Lisas mainly, and they are into the production of things like methanol, ammonia, urea, and some other petrochemical products. Unfortunately, what had happened is a lot of the upstream contracts had expired or coming close to expiry. So it meant that NGC would no longer have a ready supply of gas. Additionally, one of the difficulties was that the necessary investment in upstream hadn't taken place. So the amount of gas that was being produced upstream had started to decline. Gas goes, the majority of our gas goes to LNG, and then the rest is sold to NGC, who then onward sell it to these various petrochemical plants on the Point Lisas estate. We recognize immediately that these are one of the areas that had to be addressed. It was so important that the Office of the Prime Minister took a particular interest in us ensuring the sustainability of our gas sector in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister himself gave direction. He gave direction both through the Energy Standing Committee, but also personally at the Office of the Prime Minister, along with the Ministry of Energy. We began rebuilding some of the relationships, not only with the upstream suppliers of gas and producers of gas, but also our downstream persons. NGC was also in a difficult position, having billions of dollars of claims racked up against them as a result of the curtailment, the shortage of gas, the short amount of gas that they were supposed to supply to the downstream industry. NGC was put in a position where it was a difficult position to negotiate with our upstream suppliers. Let's start with the upstream suppliers. So there were outstanding negotiations with BP, EOG, and then expiry of agreements with Shell as well. The best way to negotiate these agreements and new agreements to purchase gas for the future and the supply of gas to NGC is when you don't have the pressure and your back is not against the wall and you actually have a few years left in your existing gas supply contracts. That did not happen. So as administration, we came in and basically these contracts were expiring in 2017 and thereafter. And there were curtailments. So it put NGC in a very difficult position. NGC was negotiating, for example, with BP and EOG, and they had hit a roadblock. They had basically hit a brick wall in those negotiations, and the negotiations were not pushing forward. If the upstream suppliers like BP and EOG, for example, did not come to concluded gas supply contracts or gas sale contracts to NGC, they would simply stop investing in the industry or invest less because they would just be supplying gas to the LNG sector and our whole petrochemical sector. All of the big players in Point Lisas, methanol, ammonia, urea, etc., would basically have no more gas supply. When this roadblock was hit, out of the Office of the Prime Minister, a decision was taken for the Prime Minister to go and meet the persons who make the decisions in the boardrooms of BP, Shell, and EOG, which, as you know, is a Houston trip of 2017. I accompanied the Prime Minister on that trip. As the Prime Minister has said on countless occasions, as I have said on countless occasions, as the Minister of Energy has said on countless occasions prior to today, the Prime Minister did not engage in negotiations of gas prices. He did not engage in those discussions in Houston in 2017. We did not engage in negotiations. What it needed was the Prime Minister at his level to meet with the leadership of these various companies, BP, EOG, and Shell, to have discussions with them, to try and create space for the conversations and the negotiations between NGC and these various entities to come to agreements on how the future supply of gas and the price of the supply of gas would take place. So, for example, with BP, as you now know, when we were flying into Houston, there was a storm on the ground. We had to actually stay in the air for, I think, 45 minutes longer than anticipated. The BP executives were already waiting in the meeting, and we went straight from the plane when we had left Trinidad early in the morning into that room with BP for the Prime Minister to discuss with the executives. Before that, NGC and BP had engaged in negotiations. They were close to finding a spot, what we call a sweet spot, for the price that would be a price agreed between BP and NGC. By the Prime Minister engaging in conversation with the executives of BP and then telling them to give in. They then gave instructions to the BP executives who were negotiating gas prices. I stepped out of the room, spoke to NGC. I was in a room with the NGC technocrats on one line of the phone, the BP technocrats. We managed to negotiate. They managed to negotiate a formula for gas. If NGC and BP did not agree that gas price in Houston in 2017, in March, if I remember correctly, there would have been no more downstream industry in Trinidad. It is a fact that those formulas and the pricing of gas have changed. The price that NGC is buying gas at and are more expensive than what were negotiated decades ago. So the problem is the previous contracts were negotiated decades ago, and they were negotiated at a time where the gas industry was very different. NGC was able to purchase gas at a cheaper price. Times have changed. You know what happened when the Prime Minister went to meet with the EOG executives. Again, there was no negotiation of price in those boardrooms, but a discussion, and immediately on an agreement with the price after consulting the NGC persons in Trinidad. It allowed immediate investment in the sector, and EOG continued. In fact, they came and met with the Prime Minister again this week to reassure him that they're doing more exploration and production of gas, and they intend to continue doing so going past the next 5 years, and they found good prospects. I am raising all of this in the context of what I've seen taking place in the public domain, an attempt by a couple persons, some of who I consider armchair experts is the terminology used to describe them recently, and one who likes to call himself the energy correspondent, or yes, I think that sometimes doesn't even put a byline, but just says the energy correspondent or the energy expert in one of the newspapers, suggesting that because there are now difficulties with NGC purchasing gas and taking supplies of gas from BP, which has happened recently because of the price of gas, the margins at NGC then, let me just back up and tell you now about the downstream, sorry. NGC then had to engage in very difficult negotiations with many of the downstream players, methanol players, the CNC. As you all would recall, when we were in the middle of negotiations with CNC, the negotiations broke down. The plant was shut down for a few weeks. Everyone thought it would be end of the not everyone. These same armchair experts were saying it would be end of the energy industry and the downstream industry. They were predicting doom and gloom. NGC and the government knew what they were doing. There are always difficulties when you're having some of these commercial negotiations. The price margin has been reduced. So NGC is purchasing gas at a higher price than it did decades ago. So obviously it has to sell the gas onwards at a higher price as well. The government took a policy decision that the NGC margin on gas, because it is purchasing gas at a higher price but needed to keep the downstream petrochemical industry going, that it would accept smaller margins from NGC. So NGC was no longer in that space where it could buy gas for cheap, sell it for more expensive, and make the amount of money it did before. It's buying gas at a price that is more expensive. It has to sell it on at a price that the downstream industry were not accustomed to prior to that. It's more expensive. But we took a shrinkage of the NGC margin, so they will make less. It is being suggested by these persons that it is the Prime Minister who negotiated a bad price for gas. That is completely untrue. NGC at all times and the technocrats were part of these discussions and negotiations, and they are not bad prices for gas. The industry has changed. Everybody has to accept, and the downstream have accepted that the industry has changed. So, as you now know, with that CNC conversation, even though they had shut the plant for a couple of weeks, we eventually came to a price, again the sweet spot price, that both NGC could sell the gas to them for and continue to live, and that they could purchase the gas and continue to make their profits. And that continued with other players in the downstream industry. NGC has been successfully negotiating these downstream contracts now, as we've concluded the upstream contracts. I hope in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to announce the conclusion of the purchase of future gas from Shell at favorable prices to NGC, and that will continue it. The conversation, giving you all of that contextual background I've come to address today, is this narrative that is now attempted to be sold really by two persons. neither of whom are industry experts, neither of whom have all of the information in front of them. They don't have, they were not part of the negotiations, they weren't part of the discussions, they do not even know the price that NGC is purchasing gas from, EOG, BP, Shell, Perenco, BHP. They don't know that because these are sensitive issues, nor do they know the prices that have been negotiated with the various downstream. For example, what was formerly PCS Nitrogen, Nutrient. You all would recall that a few months ago there was a nice signing ceremony at the Hyatt where Nutrient gave their commitment to continue. They are the single largest purchaser through their 4 plants at Point Lisas of purchasing gas from NGC. There are some persons in the downstream industry who are trying to push a narrative because obviously they want to get a different price on gas. And they're using certain persons to push this narrative for them. And these persons who may claim to be independent media personnel, there's doubt as to whether they are really independent media personnel or whether they're pushing a narrative for persons. The point is that at no point in time did the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago negotiate the final gas prices or these gas issues. What the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago did is he used his office, the Office of Prime Minister, to reopen when the negotiations had hit a brick wall, and they were blocked and they were going no further. He used that office to come and push for Trinidad and Tobago that there was a need to continue discussions, there was a need for the parties to reach an agreement on price. And he used the weight of his office, being, as he himself has said on a number of occasions, being the #1 salesperson for Trinidad and Tobago. And he freed that conversation that was then able to take place in Houston for us to agree a gas price. Yesterday morning, Minister Khan and myself met with BP. And one of the issues we discussed with BP was again looking at that formula. BP has asked that NGC provide them with the necessary details. These are very complex issues, and they are willing to sit with us and look at it because a price has already been agreed. So it's 2 points I want to emphasize. One, it is completely wrong to say that the Prime Minister negotiated any gas price. Thank God the Prime Minister went and did what he did because it allowed the conversation to be concluded because the parties had hit a deadlock. The second point is that the gas industry has changed. So what existed before has changed. The price of gas is more expensive. It is still competitive. Because if the downstream industries were not competitive with their plants, believe you me, they would have picked up and left a long time ago. They all meet with us, continue to meet with us, and say that they intend to be in Trinidad and Tobago for a long time. We're working through with them, and there are a number of other initiatives. There have been other initiatives that we're pursuing and we're following that hopefully will build NGC's barrel or tank of gas at different prices to average it out, etc. So we felt it necessary to come here today and to address these issues before they start to take a life of their own and to put these things to rest. At this stage, I'll invite any questions. June?
Sir, good afternoon. I'm just wondering, from what you said just now, is the government in a position to say definitively that the issue of natural gas curtailment, especially with Point Lisas and so on, is over?
No. The answer is I wouldn't say it is completely over and to say it definitively is over. So I don't have the statistics. What you call is the DCQ, the daily consumption of DCG, the daily consumption of gas per plant. And I think it still is fluctuating. But what has happened, it has greatly improved. So whereas there were some plants that were suffering at below 70%, they've gone up over 80%. And my understanding is, yes, it is improving. When we came in, the amount of gas on some days had hit 3.1 billion scuffs, where there was a need for 4.2, 4.1, 3.8. We're back up averaging around 3.8 on a daily basis. So things have improved significantly.
How does that factor into the issue of the Atlantic LNG trains, like Train 1, for example?
Okay, thank you for reminding me, Jules. I am happy to announce, and I'm sure that the parties themselves will announce. You would have heard us say a couple months ago that we were in serious negotiations with respect to the future of Atlantic. The government's empowered negotiation team had completed the first round of negotiations with BP. That's something separate. But in those negotiations, we had engaged the shareholders of Train 1, who are NGC, a Chinese wealth fund, their largest sovereign wealth fund called CIC, Shell, and BP. And we will be able to announce what it is we were able to agree with them. I got a message this morning that all of the shareholders of Atlantic have now signed the agreements as of yesterday to continue with the life of Train 1. So that is great news for Trinidad and Tobago, because that was coming to an end in the next couple of days, at the end of March. So the shareholders of Atlantic have agreed, and they've now signed the contracts to continue for the next 5 years with Train 1. They're going to spend quite a significant tens of millions of US dollars improving the plant at Train 1, getting it back to a better state of readiness, and continuing for the next 5 years. It is also great news for Trinidad and Tobago, because the empowered negotiation team managed to negotiate with the BPs and Shells of the world, well, BP and Shell on this occasion, much better prices for Trinidad and Tobago, and a formula that we'll talk about in the coming weeks that significantly improves the revenue of Trinidad and Tobago from Train 1. So Train 1 is a go, which is great news, and we're going to get increased revenue. We also are going to get cargoes for NGC to sell from Atlantic LNG, which can be quite significant revenue earners.
Minister, what is the projected reserves irrespective of the gas situation in this country?
I don't have that information. The Minister of Energy, I think, had laid in Parliament not too long ago the latest Ryder Scott report. And it had actually, quite fortunately, predicted an increase. Well, not predicted, it had recorded an increase in the reserve position. But I can't remember the exact figures offhand. And that is good. And I think that is a result of all of the new technology that exists in the industry and the new seismic technology. They've been able to locate new pockets of gas, etc., and move them up the probability ladder. So our gas reserves, according to the experts, we have more reserves than we thought we did. But I don't know the exact figures offhand.
Service that LIAT could drop TNT from its schedule of routes. Can you share any information on that?
I don't have the specifics of that, but you all would recall that when the Prime Minister returned from his last visit, his last meetings with CARICOM heads, he told us that LIAT was one of the issues that was discussed, that LIAT had come and informed the heads of CARICOM that there were financial difficulties, there needed to be injections of money. He did also say at that time that various CARICOM countries would have to take decisions as to how much money they can put towards LIAT, and that may affect some of the routes. I saw in the newspapers, I think it's this morning, some suggestion that if Trinidad and Tobago doesn't do certain things, it could mean the discontinuance of LIAT to Trinidad and Tobago, but that is completely outside my purview, and I don't have the information with respect to that. But I'm sure in the coming days, whoever is the entity that is dealing with that, Ministry of Works and Transport, as well as the Ministry of Finance, will inform us, one, whether that is true, and two, how the position is going to be going forward.
On the aircraft,
which aircraft?
Well, on the topic of aircraft, the CAL lease of Boeing MAX 8 planes, any developments?
Well, you are seeing the same thing I assume I am seeing in the international press, that Boeing seems to be hard at work in rectifying and dealing with the issues that have arisen. Aircraft, those MAX 8 aircraft, as far as I'm aware, continue to be grounded. We certainly, our civil aviation, have not lifted the, I can't remember the exact term they use right now, but basically the ban on those aircraft in our airspace. As you all are aware, the lease with CAL for these aircraft was supposed to take delivery in December. That is the end of the year. We're in March, so they still have 3 quarters. There's still 9 months before we reach there. Also, the Minister of Finance had indicated that CAL had been instructed to go out and get proper legal advice, best-in-class international legal advice, looking at the lease. I haven't seen the lease agreements, but I can tell you there is a general principle and concept in law that unless something is fit for purpose, unless it is safe in these instances, we can't be forced to take the aircraft. So I am not concerned about that at this stage. The lawyers will do what they have to do. We'll see how Boeing unfolds and what will happen. There's a lot of time in the next months. So as I understand it, it continues to be in the international news that they're working on dealing with what they have to do. That's not a Trinidad and Tobago issue at this stage. We have no MAX 8s in our CAL fleet. We will wait and see how the world unfolds whilst getting proper legal advice and looking at it.
Policy that you will take into cabinet.
Okay, the note has been drafted. It is getting the final tweaks right now. I'm assuming your question is on the policy that I've been talking about taking to cabinet for the registration of Venezuelans. So the note has been drafted. It is getting the final approvals before taking it to cabinet. I'm really hoping I can take that to cabinet next week.
Would there be any attempt to incorporate and include members of CARICOM and in particular Haiti into that situation, seeing that look at Haiti, they have suffered, if not as much as, probably even more than the Venezuelan, and in terms of their urgency, though the numbers are limited, are there any concerns to include that into the situation?
Mr. Burris, you yourself have been writing letters. You've written to the Prime Minister, you've written to me, you're writing to everybody about that particular issue. As I had responded to you and told you, we have received your correspondence. Right now, the note that has been drafted is with respect to the situation from Venezuela, which is a real situation going on here immediately. We may discuss it at the stage when it gets to cabinet. Cabinet is not a rubber stamp. How we deal with other CARICOM issues, but right now CARICOM and Haiti are not the urgent issues for us, but it doesn't mean that we're not looking at it and we're not going to give it consideration. So we understand what you've submitted and what it is you've suggested, as have other people. But right now, we're looking at the situation, particularly with respect to the Venezuelan, what is going on in Venezuela and how it is affecting us.
On the security, Venezuela, the security aspects of it, well, there are two questions. One is, any updates on this thing about immigration officers being intimidated?
All right, guys, let me deal with them one at a time. This conversation that has taken a life of its own, and there seems to be some misunderstanding. I'd like to set it straight once and for all here. Immigration officers have reported to the media, and immigration officer in Cedros reported to me. So let me deal with what was reported to me. In Cedros, when I visited recently, an immigration officer said that sometimes they feel uncomfortable, and she had had a particular incident where a Trinidadian, so I am talking from that perspective, a Trinidadian had followed her after she had left post. So I immediately put things in place and asked the PS to put certain things in place after I had spoken to the police, who have a police station at this post in Cedros, for us to make it more secure for immigration officers there. Subsequent to that, people have reported, I don't know who these people are, but I've seen the media say that immigration officers reported to them that they were threatened by Venezuelans. I don't have anything in front of me, any official document in front of me telling me whether immigration officers were threatened by Venezuelans or not. But what I did say and what I stand by, if anyone threatens immigration officers or any other public servants, any law-abiding citizens in Trinidad and Tobago, I have called upon the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to deal with those things seriously. Our immigration officers at legal ports of entry are not to be threatened by anyone, Venezuelans or Trinidadians. Now, I will move to the Trinidadian aspect. There have been certain Trinidadian individuals who may have threatened immigration personnel. Some of these Trinidadian individuals are persons of interest. They may not be conducting legitimate business. Again, this has been brought to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service's attention, and we're asking anyone with information. So you have Ms. Gonzalez, I think her name is, apparent Venezuelan national, making a lot of noise in the public space and saying that they know who is doing what, etc., etc., and turning it around now to say immigration officers have been asking for bribes and have been asking for certain things to deal with Venezuelans. If Ms. Gonzalez or anyone else has information that any public servant, any immigration officer in this instance is engaging in illegal activity, please take it immediately to the police, because it is of no value to me or to anyone else just to make these statements. If there's evidence of it, provide it to us, and the police service will do what needs to be done. Immigration officers who are being threatened, or there's a risk of them being threatened, as I said, I have spoken to the Commissioner of Police about us setting up sting operations or just having plainclothes police officers in and around the airports, etc. And if the police catch anyone engaging in this type of activity, they will be arrested and charged once there's sufficient evidence.
I need to ask you a final question in the area of the note. Please forgive me. But the question must be asked, because this note that you're doing is primarily for those who are on the ground at this point in time, not for new arrivals from Venezuela. So the question is, can this not be extended for CARICOM nationals who are on the ground? And the question further to that is, if this note is passed, does that mean that Venezuelans who are now in the detention center, will they be set free? And the same thing, would it not be good for others? And again, I'm referring to our biggest manufacturing trading partners, which is CARICOM, and the question of our CARICOM nationals that are suffering right now in our country and need that same type of...
Okay, first of all, let me ask you this. Who are the CARICOM nationals suffering in Trinidad and Tobago? I am not aware that we have holding CARICOM nationals in our detention center. Are we holding CARICOM nationals in our detention center?
The information that there are a number of persons being held, I knew of one person who was there.
A number of persons or a person?
I know of one person who was there, but I'm saying, no, the question is not numbers, because I know it's far
okay,
less.
But no, but I'm
we're talking, Minister, about people on the ground at this point in time. We're not talking about new arrivals. So we're talking about CARICOM nationals who may be here that need a similar assistance.
But what is the assistance? What the note that is being taken to Cabinet is for the registration of Venezuelans, all right? Because we have a number of Venezuelans who are here illegally. This conversation has been taking place. No one can say with any certainty how many Venezuelans there are actually here. You heard the UN come out with a figure of 40,000. You heard those irresponsible persons in opposition take that figure up. As they're speaking in a sentence, certain parliamentarians will say it's 50,000, 70,000, in the same sentence. We need to know factually how many there are here. And just to give it context, you would have seen recently the chief administrator in Tobago, Mr. Sandy, say that the figure of Tobagonians, persons living in Tobago, the amount of Tobagonians is 50,000. If you think about the whole population of Tobago and what exists in Tobago, I personally find it very difficult to believe we have that same transposition of Venezuelans here on the ground. So the first thing is, let's get the facts. So let us call on all Venezuelans to come in and register. Those Venezuelans who are the proposal, and all of this is subject to the approval of Cabinet. I've been very careful to say that throughout. So Cabinet will decide and take the final decision as to what the policy is, and then we will announce it. The proposal that will go for Cabinet's consideration is persons, I'm dealing with the Venezuelans before I come to your specific question on CARICOM nationals, persons who are in the detention center for overstaying, then they will be allowed to register, they will be allowed to work legally for the period of a year. That's fine, all right? So it's a registration process, and persons who have been registered, whether here legally or illegally, so if you're here illegally in the detention center, you're going to be allowed to register. You have to provide certain information, etc. Once you meet the criteria, you're not a criminal, you haven't engaged in criminal activity, because if you're incarcerated because you've engaged in criminal activity, registration is not a free pass, a get out of jail. So that's what is going to be proposed to deal with the Venezuelans. This came to the forefront because of the reality of the situation we're facing in Trinidad and Tobago. Being closer to Venezuela, Trinidad being closer to Venezuela than it actually is to Tobago, and the influx of Venezuelans as things have become more difficult in Venezuela. So that is what we're dealing with. That's the situation that created it. There is no similar situation, save for what you've described in Haiti, throughout the rest of the CARICOM. We don't have that influx and that need. So the persons who are coming in from CARICOM, I assume the vast majority of them, are coming in via legal ports of entry, and the laws apply to them. So, and you would have heard the recent heads of government, this meeting that took place here in December, to reprioritize and put back on the front burner CSME, etc. Those are CARICOM policies. Those are policies that the CARICOM leaders have taken, that CARICOM members in certain categories should be allowed free flow and movement throughout the various CARICOM jurisdictions and to be allowed to work once you qualify in certain things. So there is no issue with those laws, etc. What we're dealing with the Venezuelans is we don't have anything set up to deal with this type of situation. So we're dealing with that specifically. All right? But as I say, I mean, I've heard you, and that is something that we can look at. But until I have the data as to what exactly is being faced, so as you say with our CARICOM brothers and sisters, I am not aware that our CARICOM brothers and sisters are being detained at the IEDC, etc. So those are things we need to look at, but I need to deal with the immediate.
Venezuela issue, Minister, just wondering, because a lot has been made, of course, of Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with the United States in support of Mr. White. But the U.S. also has raised concerns about China, what it called economic predatory practices by China in the region. Has Trinidad and Tobago heard of any concerns or anything at all from China, since China directly is supporting Mr. Maduro?
Heard anything officially from China with respect to what?
In terms of the issue of Venezuela, any concerns about our position or anything of that nature?
Not as far as I'm aware. I mean, you refer to a whole host of things there. As you know, Trinidad and Tobago weren't at that meeting, so the meeting that took place in Miami that talked about on the agenda China predatory behavior, but no, nothing has been raised as far as I'm aware.
Venezuela, I'm getting a briefing here that...
you are getting a briefing there?
I've got a briefing here that CNN apparently reported that Russian military has confirmed their presence in Venezuela. Is this something for us to be concerned about one way or the other?
Again, those are the internal affairs of Venezuela. So I've been following what you've been following in the international media, that there seems to be confirmation that there are Russian troops on the ground there, and that that's between the United States, Russia, and Venezuela. That's not a Trinidad and Tobago issue.
Press release from the opposition about an hour ago, where they're saying that the government needs to come clean and tell the nation who would be the real owners of the Paria fuel trading company.
I'm laughing because there have been at least 3 releases by me in the last 48 hours with this. Let's start, because the opposition obviously have a difficulty reading and have a difficulty following what is correct news and what is factual. Paria has gone out, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, which is the holding company, went out and they've stated very, very clearly that they have gone for requests for proposals as to how to deal with the refinery, what was formerly Petrotrin, and the refinery that's now in Guaracara. Part of that process may include the Prime Minister stood here, I think it was last week, and said he's giving the final word on that. It is premature to determine what the RFPs that may come in for the refinery may say. Anyone who's looking at the refinery is going to need, at minimum, access to Paria and Paria's assets, which are the holding tanks, the pipelines. You're going to need to bring in crude. When you have a finished product, you're going to need to store it to then transship it. I saw that Trinidad Petroleum Holding Limited this week put out a press release saying they've received, or last week, 58 responses to the request for proposals. A request for proposals means, world at large, we have a refinery, please tell us any proposal that you have for the refinery. Those proposals may or may not include the assets of Paria. Only after those proposals are evaluated and narrowed down and then brought a handful for consideration as to these are the proposals before as to how the refinery and Paria can be dealt with, can any decision be taken? We are very far from that. So no, there has been no sale of Paria. No matter how the opposition now wants to backtrack from this misinformation they've put out, not even a distortion of reality, because there's no reality in it whatsoever. The opposition are the ones who created this false narrative that Paria has been sold. Paria has not been sold. And the media, I'm explaining to you all, as I've just done, there's a request for proposals those proposals. I'm not even sure whether yes, they are, because there are 58 proposals in, where they've reached in terms of the evaluation of those proposals and what the final income would be. I certainly have no idea. Maybe the opposition have promised it to somebody. I don't know. But certainly as a government, PARIA has not been sold, and there are proposals, 58, that are being evaluated by an independent body in the first place for then onward recommendation to the government.
Question to the sports minister, if you would mind. In terms of Shanice Batiste, are you satisfied enough was done to communicate to the family? Or let me rephrase the question, should more have been done to communicate to the family sooner what had happened to her when she was abroad? Because I think that's one of the concerns I understand from the family.
Yeah, I too have an issue with that, because it wasn't even communicated to the ministry. The SOTT was out in Abu Dhabi, and it was not until they were ready to come home on Thursday that they contacted the family and contacted the ministry. Because I was contacted by Avalon Perry, as I told you, at 7:35 that night. So I reached out then to the ministry and the SOTT, and that is the same time that I learned that we had an athlete who was unwell and who had to be hospitalized and who would not be returning home on Friday with the rest of the team. So I really think that from the time this young lady was hospitalized, that the SOTT should have communicated even with their representatives who were back home. They didn't even communicate with their own representatives who were back home to let them know that an athlete had become unwell. So we all learned of this on Thursday night, the night before she returned home. So I think that a better job could have been done as it relates to that. I know the president of the SOTT had apologized directly to the family face-to-face, and the SOT also issued an apology yesterday. I saw it on social media. But from Thursday night, I know every day the family was kept up to date after last week, Thursday night.
That's something that the ministry would want to look at, to revisit any procedures or any lapses thereof for future types of athletic.
We have to acknowledge that all these athletic bodies are non-profit organizations. They're their own bodies, they're their own autonomous bodies. We kept in contact with the SOTT each day, and we were not informed. So there's very little as to what the ministry can do to make an SOTT. There's no rule, no regulation, but I think it's all about open communication. I know many of the workers who volunteer or work with the SOTT are aged people, and this year they took a new approach where they tried to take out more young people so that they would have the experience. So you had a lot of first-timers with the team. But I think that still is no excuse as it relates to providing up-to-date information from the time that a young lady was admitted to hospital. I think that the courtesy of informing the family, even if it's through a text message, and even to keep our communications officer who was in contact with SOTT each day. I think that the SOTT could have done a better job with that, and since then the president, Ms. Candela, has apologized for that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? You said before that the cost is totally being borne by the Special Olympics in terms of the insurance.
The insurance, yes.
On the arrival of the young lady, would the ministry have a specialist in the airport just in case, as a security backup measure, because she says she's coming with special breathing apparatus? Would there be a specialist there as part of to meet her?
No, the young lady is breathing freely on her own on the ground. The oxygen apparatus is just for when she's in the air, in the plane, to ensure that nothing happens out of the way, So it's like a backup system just to ensure that everything runs smoothly and safely. In the pictures this morning, in the interaction, she has been off oxygen therapy for at least 2 days or so.
In this country, I think 2 or 3 sports ambassadors. I know one is Brian Lara, and I think there's a cricketer, if my memory serves me right. The other is Dwight York. Are you aware, Minister, that for the last few years, Dwight York had not received his what do you call numerations?
When we came into government, we met a number of arrangements with different athletes to be ambassadors for Trinidad and Tobago. That policy was revised, and something new has to be worked out as it relates to what are their duties, the reporting function. I know that Dwight York had a separate arrangement with the Tobago House of Assembly, and Brian Lara had a separate arrangement with Trinidad as it relates to tourism and in sport. Right now, conversations are being held with Brian Lara as it relates to re-establishing these arrangements and the role that he could play as it relates to tourism, as it relates to sport development, and especially your totally participation in sport program. We will have met as late as the Friday before Carnival. He's out of the country as we speak, and when he returns, we'll resume conversation.
Received any correspondence from the Netball Association with respect to their World Cup? I know that we saw some media reports where they were looking for some funding.
We have been in conversation with the Netball Association through Sport TT because, as you know, there are certain sports that fall under Sport TT and some directly under the ministry, and netball is one that falls under Sport TT. Since December 20th, in December, Netball was notified that they would receive their full funding request, and we made representation to the Ministry of Finance. We worked along with them to ensure that their necessary documents were provided. We made our case to the Ministry of Finance in February, and the monies were released this week, and we were able to give Netball their check up this morning. So a representative came to the ministry and received a check for accommodation. But even right now, as we speak, Netball still needs to provide information as it relates to who is going to fly and the cost for the flight, so that could be done next week. Right now, if we're supposed to cut them a check for airlift, we don't know what the amount would be because they still have some outstanding documents and information. But for the items that they have provided, the necessary documents in their request, which is accommodation, we would have delivered a check to them today in the amount of, I think it's $227,000. The same is so for basketball. Basketball is being funded by Sport TT to go out to Pan Am Games, also entry A's, also swimming. We have a number of organizations that have requested funding, and within the next couple of weeks, in time for Pan Am and in time for their games. So Netball has a deadline of tomorrow midday, and we trust that they would do what's necessary based on the fact that they've received the check this morning to process their payments. The Dwight York Stadium, we still have some work to do on the Dwight York Stadium. Phases 1 and 2 have been completed, and phase 3 deals with the light and some other aesthetics. We've allowed the Dwight York Stadium to be used by the sporting fraternity in Tobago. So far, the secondary school sporting competition has been held, the primary school also, and we have the Falcon Games coming up. So we make the facility available. The only time the facility would not be available would when we get to the actual installation of the lights. For night games, we wouldn't be able to allow people to use it at that time, but we interact very closely with UDCUT to ensure that the facilities are made available to the necessary people in the sporting fraternity in Tobago. A deadline? Well, we are going now into a third phase. We're going now into a third phase, so as it relates to the scope of works and so on, I'm unable to tell you exactly, but we'll be doing some works to the gym, some works to the grounds, also some works to lighting. I think lighting is the biggest part of the third phase, but for most part, the roofing is completed. We have some replacement of some of the seats. We did the PA system for the covered section. We want to work on the PA system for the other section, for the uncovered section also. So as it relates to holding the basic sporting activities in Tobago, Dwight York is ready. But I don't want to tell people that they're free to just book Dwight York, because when we get ready to do the lights, Dwight York has to be closed for some days in order to facilitate the erection of the lights.
Sir, you spoke about Liat a while ago. Are there any plans being considered for possibly the incorporation of Liat into the Tobago connection Because if we are part funding and we're looking to increase the funding,
Hold on. Who said we were part funding? Nowhere in any conversation did we say anything about funding.
possibility in terms of the reduction flights, well, forgive me, the reduction flights from Trinidad, possibly the reduction flight from Liat in terms of coming to Trinidad. Could there be a conversation being held? Can you hold a conversation in respect to Liat possibly assisting in terms of sometimes that situation that occur here when we have the peak time?
Mr. Burris.
Let me ask you two questions, and then I will close up completely. Respect, if I may, sir, I do apologize.
Of course you can.
Yeah. In utilizing of Liat in that area to help us. But finally, sir, there was a terrorist attack in New Zealand recently. The government swiftly moved in terms of reducing the gun situation and the gun laws in terms of that. Our country, we have murders being committed day in day out. Your passion, the minister and the police commissioner passion is extremely great and well intended. But can we not do something with respect to stiffer gun, are there consideration for stiffer gun penalty, gun laws, and also possibly a gun court in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you very much. Let me deal with the Liat thing first of all. At no point in time did we say anything about funding Liat. What my answer was that I don't have the specifics of what has brought about that report in the newspapers. The Minister of Works and Transport, Minister of Finance will deal with that. The Prime Minister did say on his last return from the CARICOM heads meeting that he had that we are a very small percentage shareholder. So what they were looking, if it's injections of equity, we don't really fall into that category. With respect to the leasing of ATRs, as you all would be aware, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, there was damage to one of our ATRs at service, one of our CAL, Caribbean Airline ATRs. I am not sure where they're wet leasing a new ATR from, etc. If, again, that's outside of my remit. So if it is that for the Airbridge there's need for ATRs and Liat have something to offer, that's a conversation the relevant people will take up. That's not for me. With respect to, I'm glad you raised on the firearms side. I am intending to bring legislation or a policy to Cabinet asking them to agree to the increase in fines, penalties, sentences for repeat firearm offenders. So that is one way that I intend to deal with it. Again, that will be subject to Cabinet. But what I envisage and what I've asked be prepared as a note, a first offender, this is the level of fine and sentence that you're liable to. Second time we catch you with an illegal firearm and you're charged with an illegal firearm, I would like it to go up substantially. The third time, third striking you out, again, higher again. So that will act as a deterrent and to make it a serious thing. Because one of the issues we have in national security is very often persons are found with illegal firearms, they're charged. They are now going to court pleading guilty because the judiciary, some judges, some magistrates might give a high fine, a jail sentence, others may not. I intend via legislation to make it very, very, I was going to say draconian, yeah, to use the law to make the penalty for repeat offenders using firearms something that they think twice and three times about doing. So thank you all very much for that. With respect to the gun court, as you know, there's the case of the Privy Council case of Hines versus R, and they dealt with in Jamaica gun court. Administratively, a court can be declared as a court to deal with firearm offences as a matter for the judiciary. Last question, because I have to go.
Thing concerning with BP, I think the issue of Galeota-based contractors, local content with BP.
I know who asked you that question, to ask that question. There's no update. What happened yesterday morning, Minister Khan, as the Minister of Energy, and myself met with the two BP executives to raise the conversation. There is some concern by local contractors in the Galeota, Mayaro area, and we began a frank discussion with them. We're now going to hold conversations with the other stakeholders. We have made the government's position very clear. The government is going to push for local content, but local content is not only a company owned by Trinidadians or the majority owned by Trinidadians. Local content in these communities are the community-based contractors as well. And to make sure that the community-based contractors, as best as we can, are part of the conversation and continue to have business in their communities, etc. Okay, thank you all very much. Yeah.
Killing people. Is there any role you can play?
Any role I could play?
Legislation, policy?
I mean, it's against the law. So you know, as a legislator, it's against the law to speed, even with it being against the law. I mean, I was a practicing attorney. Police services, fire services, ambulances, etc. don't have any right to speed, right? So the law of negligence, as Mr. Burris will tell you, covers that. If you're traveling in circumstances that are not reasonable, speeds that are not reasonable in built-up areas, you are liable in civil law. You are also liable because you can have manslaughter by a vehicle in criminal law, etc. So basically, I'm calling upon, and I'd like to use the opportunity to call upon all of our response personnel, all of those men and women, not only in the police service, in the defense force, in the fire services, etc. Just drive cautiously and be aware that there are other users of the road, including pedestrians, and we have a responsibility to them as well. Okay, thank you all very much.
We've come to the end of today's weekly post-cabinet media briefing. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube at TTT Live Online for all of the stories coming out of today's media briefing. I'm Mahalia Joseph Wharton. Have a good afternoon.
The winning numbers in the National Lottery online draws for Thursday, 28th